Imagine a world shimmering with silk, where poetry was a weapon and the scent of perfume a political statement. This was Japan's Heian period, a golden age of elegance centered around the emperor, the divine figurehead seated on the chrysanthemum throne. For nearly 400 years, from the late 8th to the late 12th century, the city of Heian, what we now call Kyoto, was the heart of the world. Here, in opulent palaces and meticulously designed gardens, an elite class of courtiers lived lives dedicated to art, literature, and romance. They wrote some of the world's first novels, like The Tale of Genji, a masterpiece that captures the delicate, fleeting beauty of their existence. Every detail was an art form. The layering of robes, the blending of incense, even the handwriting on a love letter were all judged with the utmost seriousness. The imperial court was a bubble of refinement, a universe unto itself, seemingly detached from the gritty realities of the outside world. The emperor was revered as a living god, a direct descendant of the sun goddess, Amaterasu. His role was spiritual and ceremonial, a vital link between the heavens and the earth. But while the courtiers were busy perfecting their calligraphy and composing melancholic poems about the moon, a profound change was happening just beyond the palace walls. The very system that created this utopia of culture contained the seeds of its own undoing. The emperor, for all his divine status, held very little actual political power. Real authority had long been outsourced to powerful aristocratic families, most notably the Fujiwara clan. Through strategic marriages, marrying their daughters to emperors and then ruling as regents for their grandsons, the Fujiwara effectively controlled the throne for centuries. The emperor became a figurehead, a symbol, while the Fujiwaras and other court nobles managed the state's affairs. This focus on court intrigue and jockeying for position in Kyoto had a critical side effect. The provinces, the vast lands outside the capital, were largely neglected. The central government's authority barely reached beyond the city limits. Land ownership became concentrated in the hands of these same powerful nobles and influential Buddhist monasteries. They established vast private estates called shun, which were often tax-exempt. As tax revenue dried up, the imperial government grew weaker and weaker. It couldn't afford to maintain a national army or effectively police its own territory. This created a power vacuum. Who would protect these massive estates? Who would enforce the law in the countryside where bandits roamed and disputes over land were common? The answer wouldn't come from the perfumed halls of Kyoto. It would emerge from the mud and blood of the provinces. It would come from a new kind of man, the warrior, the samurai. And so we turn the page to our second act. As the emperor's light dimmed, a new star began to rise. This is the story of the samurai's ascent. Initially, these warriors were little more than hired guards, provincial enforcers employed by the court nobles and landowners to protect their estates and collect taxes. They were seen as rough, uncultured men, a necessary evil to manage the unruly countryside. The courtiers in Kyoto looked down on them, dismissing them as mere servants, far removed from their world of refined aesthetics. But these servants were becoming incredibly powerful, living lives of constant training and peril. They honed their skills in archery, horsemanship, and swordsmanship. They developed a unique code of conduct, one that valued loyalty, courage, and honor above all else. This code, which would later evolve into what we call Bushido, was the bedrock of their identity. Their loyalty wasn't to the distant, symbolic emperor, but to their direct lord, the master of the estate they protected. Powerful warrior clans began to form, centered around charismatic leaders. Names that would echo through Japanese history, the Taira and the Minamoto, began to gain prominence. These clans built private armies, loyal only to them. They fought each other for land and influence, growing stronger and more organized with each skirmish. While the court in Kyoto was playing games of love and poetry, the samurai were playing a game of survival and conquest. The tipping point came in the mid-12th century. A succession dispute within the imperial family itself erupted into open conflict. Both sides, desperate for military might, made a fateful decision. They called upon the great samurai clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, to fight for them. For the first time, samurai armies marched into the capital, their swords clashing within sight of the imperial palace. The courtiers watched in horror as the warriors they had long disdained decided the fate of the throne. The refined world of the Heian period was shattered. Once the samurai had a taste of real power, they weren't going to give it back. The conflict between the Taira and Minamoto clans escalated into a full-blown civil war, the Genpei War, that tore Japan apart for 5 brutal years. This wasn't a war fought with poems, it was fought with steel and arrows. It ended in 1185 with the decisive victory of the Minamoto clan, led by the brilliant and ruthless Minamoto no Yoritomo. He didn't make the mistake of trying to rule from within the old court system. Instead, he established a new government, a military government, in a town called Kamakura, far from the intrigues of Kyoto. He took the title of Shogun, which means great general, and became the de facto ruler of Japan. The emperor remained on the chrysanthemum throne in Kyoto, a revered but powerless figurehead. The real power now rested in the hands of the shogun and the warrior class he commanded. The age of the courtier was over. The age of the samurai had begun. This seismic shift would define Japan for the next 700 years, creating a society shaped by the sword and the warrior's code. The elegant, poetic world of the Heian court became a distant memory, a beautiful dream from which the nation had been violently awakened. The warrior, once a mere guard in the provinces, was now the master of the land. Welcome back, history buffs. Last time, we witnessed the magnificent rise of the samurai, a warrior class bound by honor and duty. But what happens when the center cannot hold, when an entire nation collapses into a century-long bloody free-for-all? Today, we descend into the heart of darkness, Japan's Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. Imagine a Japan not as a unified nation, but as a shattered mirror, with nearly 200 ambitious warlords or daimyo, each commanding their own private army of samurai. The Ashikaga shogunate, once the supreme military authority, was now a hollow shell, its power reduced to a whisper in the wind. The emperor, a divine figurehead, was a prisoner in his own palace, a pawn in the deadly games of power-hungry lords. This wasn't just a series of battles, it was a state of perpetual warfare, a crucible that would forge Japan anew or burn it to ashes. The year is 1467. The Onin War erupts in the streets of Kyoto, the imperial capital itself. What started as a bitter succession dispute within the Ashikaga clan spiraled into a decade-long conflict that gutted the city and shattered the last vestiges of central authority. When the smoke cleared, Japan was fundamentally broken. This was the birth of Gekkokujo, a new and terrifying social phenomenon meaning the low overthrowing the high. Loyal vassals turned on their masters, sons betrayed their fathers, and brothers drew swords against one another. The old hierarchies, the very foundation of samurai society, were crumbling. In this age of chaos, loyalty became a commodity, and honor a luxury few could afford. Survival was the only law. Each daimyo carved out a domain, building formidable mountain castles, raising peasant armies, and constantly scheming to absorb their neighbors. It was a brutal chess match played with armies of thousands. Every spring, as the snows melted, the campaigns would begin anew. Fields were burned, villages were razed, and the land itself seemed to weep blood. Samurai warfare evolved dramatically during this period. The grand ritualized duels of the past gave way to the cold, hard pragmatism of mass combat. Tactics became paramount. Deception, ambush, and espionage were no longer seen as dishonorable, but as essential tools for victory. Ninja, the shadowy spies and assassins from Iga and Koka provinces, found their services in high demand, becoming the unseen hand that could topple a clan from within. The ideal samurai was no longer just a heroic warrior, but a cunning strategist and a ruthless leader. Men like Uesugi Kenshin, the Dragon of Echigo, and Takeda Shingen, the Tiger of Kai, became legends in their own time. Their rivalry was epic, culminating in the legendary battles of Kawanakajima. These were not just warlords. They were brilliant military minds who commanded unwavering loyalty from their men, embodying the flickering flame of the old samurai spirit in a world consumed by ambition. Yet even their immense power was confined to their respective regions. For decades, it seemed no single individual possessed the strength, the vision, or the sheer audacity to conquer them all. Who could possibly unite this fractured land? The answer would come from the most unlikely of places. Our story now shifts to the minor domain of Owari Province. Here, a young, eccentric, and widely underestimated heir was making a name for himself, not for his refinement, but for his wild and unpredictable behavior. They called him the Fool of Owari. His name was Oda Nobunaga, and he would become the first of Japan's three great unifiers. Born in 1534, Nobunaga was anything but a typical daimyo's son. He defied all conventions, running wild in the streets with commoners, dressing flamboyantly, and showing little respect for the stuffy rituals of the court. His own retainers despaired, believing their clan was doomed under his leadership. But beneath this foolish exterior was a mind of unparalleled genius and a will of tempered steel. When his father died, Nobunaga moved with lightning speed, ruthlessly eliminating rival family members and consolidating his control over Owari Province. The Fool was a facade, a brilliant act of deception in an age where showing your true strength too early could be a fatal mistake. Nobunaga's true genius became apparent at the Battle of Okehazama in 1560. He was vastly outnumbered, facing the massive army of Imagawa Yoshimoto, one of the most powerful daimyo of the time, who was marching on Kyoto to declare himself shogun. While his advisors urged him to hide behind his castle walls, Nobunaga made a seemingly suicidal gamble. Leading a small force of just 2,000 men, he launched a surprise attack on the Imagawa camp during a thunderstorm. The chaos was absolute. Imagawa Yoshimoto was slain, his army disintegrated, and in a single afternoon, the Fool of Owari became a major player on the national stage. This victory was a turning point. Nobunaga wasn't just lucky, he was a revolutionary. He understood that the old ways of war were obsolete. He promoted his retainers based on merit, not on birthright, a radical concept at the time. A peasant with talent, like the man who would one day become Toyotomi Hideyoshi, could rise to the highest ranks in Nobunaga's army. He was also one of the first Japanese leaders to grasp the transformative power of European firearms. When Portuguese traders arrived in Japan in the 1540s, they brought with them the arquebus, a primitive but deadly matchlock rifle. While many samurai disdained these weapons as cowardly and dishonorable, Nobunaga saw their potential. He ordered them in massive quantities, trained specialized units of ashigaru or peasant foot soldiers to use them, and developed innovative tactics to overcome their slow firing rate. His masterpiece was the Battle of Nagashino in 1575. He faced the legendary cavalry of the Takeda clan, widely considered the most powerful cavalry force in Japan. Instead of meeting them in the open field, Nobunaga constructed wooden palisades and stationed 3,000 arquebusiers behind them in rotating ranks. As the Takeda cavalry charged, they were met not with spears, but with a continuous, devastating volley of gunfire. The charge was broken, the elite Takeda army was annihilated, and samurai warfare was changed forever. The age of the mounted warrior hero was over. The age of disciplined, firearm-equipped infantry had begun. But Nobunaga's ambition was matched only by his cruelty. His motto was Tenka Fubu, or rule the realm by military force, and he pursued this goal with terrifying ruthlessness. When the powerful Buddhist warrior monks of Mount Hiei defied him, he didn't just defeat them, he surrounded their entire monastery complex and burned it to the ground, slaughtering tens of thousands of men, women, and children. When the Iko-Iki, a sect of militant religious fanatics, resisted him for years, he laid siege to their fortress cathedral for a decade, eventually burning them out and showing no mercy. It was this mixture of visionary genius and appalling brutality that earned him the moniker, the Demon King. By 1582, Nobunaga stood on the cusp of total victory. He had conquered central Japan, controlled the emperor, and his best generals were fanning out to subdue the remaining rival clans in the west. He was the undisputed master of Japan, a titan who had single-handedly dragged a nation out of a century of chaos. He seemed invincible, but in the Sengoku Jidai, betrayal was always lurking in the shadows. While staying at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto, with only a small retinue of bodyguards, Nobunaga was betrayed by one of his most trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide. Surrounded with no hope of escape, the Demon King, the man who had burned temples to the ground, met his end in a blazing inferno of his own. Rather than be captured, Oda Nobunaga committed seppuku, and the temple burned down around him, leaving his ultimate fate shrouded in mystery. The dream of unification was shattered. Or was it? Nobunaga's death plunged the nation back into uncertainty, creating a power vacuum. But the seeds he had planted were about to bear fruit. Two of his most brilliant retainers, Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu, would now step out of his shadow. One a peasant who rose to become a ruler, the other a patient strategist who would bide his time. The race to finish what the Demon King started had begun. Join us next time as we explore the incredible story of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the man who completed the unification of Japan, and the titanic struggle that would lead to the final decisive battle that would usher in 250 years of peace. Last time, we left Japan on the cusp of unification after a century of relentless civil war. The question was, who would finally seize control and bring lasting peace? The answer came in the year 1600 on the fields of Sekigahara. Imagine this, over 160,000 samurai clashing in a single day. This was the Battle of Sekigahara, the decisive conflict that would shape Japan for the next 250 years. On one side was Ishida Mitsunari, loyal to the heir of the great unifier Toyotomi Hideyoshi. On the other, the patient, cunning, and powerful lord, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Ieyasu had waited his whole life for this moment. Through brilliant strategy and a few key betrayals on the battlefield, he secured a total victory. 3 years later, in 1603, the emperor named him Shogun, and the Tokugawa shogunate was born. The era of the warring states was officially over. But how do you keep a country of proud, battle-hardened samurai lords in line? Ieyasu was a political genius. He established a new capital in Edo, which we now know as Tokyo, and created a masterful system of control. He classified the daimyo, or feudal lords, into 3 groups based on their loyalty to him before Sekigahara. The most trusted were placed in strategic locations, while the less trusted, the so-called outside lords, were moved to the fringes of the country, surrounded by loyalists. The most ingenious part of his plan, however, was a system called Sankin Kotai, or alternate attendance. This required every daimyo to spend every other year living in the capital city of Edo, away from their own domains. And when they returned home, they had to leave their wives and children behind in Edo as hostages. Think about the sheer cost and logistical nightmare for these lords. They had to maintain 2 lavish residences and travel with huge processions back and forth. This constant travel not only drained their finances, preventing them from funding rebellions, but it also spurred the development of roads, inns, and a vibrant national economy. It was a sophisticated system of hostage-taking that effectively kept the peace for 2.5 centuries. The Great Peace had begun, but just as Japan was settling into this newfound stability, a new perceived threat emerged, one from beyond its shores. Ieyasu and his successors grew increasingly wary of European traders and missionaries. When he first came to power, he was actually quite open to foreign trade. But he saw how Spanish and Portuguese missionaries were converting thousands of Japanese, including some powerful daimyo, to Christianity. The shogunate began to fear that this new religion was a tool for foreign conquest. They worried that Christian converts would hold their loyalty to the Pope above the shogun. These fears culminated in a major peasant rebellion in 1637, the Shimabara Rebellion. Many of the rebels were Christian peasants, pushed to the brink by high taxes and persecution. Although the rebellion was brutally crushed, it confirmed the shogunate's worst fears. The solution? Drastic and absolute. In 1639, the shogunate issued the Sakoku Edict, the closed country policy. This wasn't a total shutdown, but it was close. Japanese people were forbidden from leaving the country, and any who had left were forbidden from returning on pain of death. European traders were expelled, with one tiny exception. A small Dutch trading post was allowed to remain on the man-made island of Dejima in Nagasaki harbor. Through this single tiny window, Japan maintained a trickle of contact with Western science and ideas. But for all intents and purposes, Japan sealed itself off from the rest of the world. For over 200 years, the island nation would turn inward, developing its society and culture in near total isolation. The consequences of this decision would be profound, shaping every aspect of life in the coming era. So what happens when a warrior society suddenly has no more wars to fight? When a country closes its doors to the world and enjoys centuries of peace? An explosion of culture, that's what. Welcome to the Edo period, a time of incredible artistic and social vibrancy. With peace came prosperity, and with prosperity came a new, booming urban culture, especially in cities like Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka. The samurai, once the undisputed masters of the battlefield, had to adapt. They transformed from fierce warriors into a class of bureaucrats, administrators, and scholars. They still wore their 2 swords as a symbol of their status, but their days were now filled with paperwork, not combat. This shift created a new social dynamic. While the samurai were officially at the top of the social hierarchy, a new class was gaining real power: the merchants. They were technically at the bottom of the 4-tiered system, but they were the ones with the money, and they wanted to have fun. This desire for entertainment gave rise to the ukiyo, or the floating world. This was the name given to the licensed pleasure districts, like Yoshiwara in Edo, where tea houses, theaters, and brothels flourished. It was a world dedicated to fashion, entertainment, and fleeting pleasures. This was the playground of the newly rich merchants and even some samurai looking for an escape. Out of the floating world came 2 of Japan's most iconic art forms, kabuki theater and ukiyo-e woodblock prints. Kabuki was everything a blockbuster movie is today. Dramatic, visually spectacular, with star actors who had huge fan followings. The plays told stories of historical heroes, tragic lovers, and dramatic moral conflicts. And to advertise these plays and the beautiful courtesans of the floating world, artists developed ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world. These mass-produced woodblock prints were the posters, magazines, and celebrity portraits of their day. Artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige captured not just the nightlife, but also beautiful landscapes, like Hokusai's famous The Great Wave off Kanagawa. These prints were affordable and immensely popular, providing a colorful, vivid window into the life and passions of Edo period Japan. For 250 years, this unique culture blossomed in isolation, a vibrant world of art and entertainment built on a foundation of enforced peace. But as we'll see next time, the outside world wouldn't stay away forever. The black ships were coming, and they would change Japan forever. So far, we've seen how the Tokugawa shogunate brought unprecedented peace and stability to Japan for over 2 centuries. But as we all know, nothing lasts forever. In the 19th century, beneath that calm surface, cracks began to appear. The rigid social structure that had defined the Edo period was starting to buckle. A new class of wealthy merchants was rising, gaining economic power that didn't match their low social status. They were lending money to the samurai, who were falling into debt and losing their traditional influence. Meanwhile, out in the countryside, the peasants weren't so peaceful anymore. Famines and heavy taxes led to widespread unrest and frequent uprisings. It was a pressure cooker situation. At the same time, a new wave of intellectual thought was spreading. Scholars began to question the legitimacy of the shogunate and looked back to the emperor as the true source of authority. All these internal problems were slowly eroding the foundations of Tokugawa rule, setting the stage for a dramatic collapse. The shogunate was weakening from the inside, but it would take a shock from the outside to bring the whole system crashing down. And that shock arrived in 1853 in a truly dramatic fashion. Imagine this. One summer day, the residents of Edo Bay look out to the water and see something they've never seen before. 4 massive black warships, puffing steam and smoke, anchoring right in their harbor. These weren't the familiar Japanese sailing vessels, these were monsters of iron and steam. This was the arrival of American Commodore Matthew Perry and his fleet, which the Japanese immediately dubbed the Kurofune, or the Black Ships. Perry wasn't there for a friendly visit. He carried a letter from the US president demanding that Japan end its centuries of isolation and open its ports to American trade. He made it clear he would return for an answer, and he'd bring an even larger fleet next time. This event sent a massive shockwave through the entire country. For the first time in over 200 years, Japan was defenseless against a foreign power. The shogunate, whose primary job was to protect the nation, suddenly looked weak and incompetent. The debate over how to respond, to resist or to concede, tore the government apart. Perry's arrival didn't just open Japan's ports, it blew the doors off the shogunate's authority and exposed its weakness to the entire nation. The end was now in sight. The immense pressure from both foreign powers and internal dissent fell squarely on the shoulders of one man, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the 15th and, as it would turn out, the final shogun. He took power in 1866, inheriting a situation that was spiraling out of control. Yoshinobu was a smart and capable reformer, and he tried desperately to modernize the shogunate and strengthen Japan to face the Western threat. He attempted to reorganize the army, reform the government, and adopt Western technology, but it was too little, too late. His rivals, particularly powerful clans from the south like Satsuma and Choshu, saw the shogunate's weakness as their golden opportunity. They rallied around the slogan, Sono Joy, which means revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. They used this powerful nationalist sentiment to challenge Yoshinobu's authority directly, arguing that power should be returned to the emperor. Yoshinobu found himself in an impossible position. If he fought his domestic rivals, it would plunge Japan into a devastating civil war, leaving it vulnerable to the foreign powers waiting at the gates. In a momentous decision, Yoshinobu chose the path of peace. In 1867, he voluntarily surrendered his political authority to the young Emperor Meiji, bringing an end to the Tokugawa shogunate and a 700-year era of military rule. It was a quiet, anticlimactic end to one of the most powerful institutions in Japanese history. The shogun's surrender of power wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a revolution. This pivotal moment is known as the Meiji Restoration. Now, the name is a bit misleading. While it was framed as a restoration of the emperor's power, it was really a full-blown coup d'etat led by the anti-Tokugawa samurai. They moved the young Emperor Meiji from Kyoto to Edo, renamed the city Tokyo, meaning Eastern Capital, and set about building a completely new Japan. The old feudal system was dismantled almost overnight. The domains were abolished and replaced with prefectures. The strict class system was eliminated, and the samurai lost their special status and privileges, a truly shocking development. The new government embarked on a frantic campaign of modernization and industrialization, guided by the slogan, Fukoku Kyohei, or enrich the country, strengthen the army. They sent missions to Europe and the United States to learn everything they could about Western government, industry, technology, and military tactics. In just a few decades, Japan transformed from an isolated feudal society into a modern, industrialized nation-state, a constitutional monarchy with a powerful military. It was one of the most rapid and remarkable transformations in world history. And yet, the legacy of the shoguns lived on. The emphasis on discipline, social order, and loyalty that defined the Edo period continued to shape the character of modern Japan. The story of the shoguns is not just a tale of samurai and castles. It's the story of the foundations of the Japan we know today. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through the age of the shoguns. From the rise of Minamoto no Yoritomo to the fall of Tokugawa Yoshinobu, we've covered centuries of conflict, culture, and transformation. If you have, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next historical adventure. Let us know in the comments what part of Shogun history you found most fascinating. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.